This is Egypt's iconic tower, the tallest building in Africa. At 394 meters, it rises from the heart of the brand new capital city, built from scratch in the desert. It is Africa's first super tall skyscraper. But its reign is coming to an end. Far from the stable soil of Sahara, within the saturated, shifting soil of a coastal lagoon on a narrow peninsula in West Africa, engineers are attempting the impossible. West Africa, Côte d'Ivoire, Abidjan. Here, surrounded by waters of Ebre Air Lagoon, a 77-story tower is entering its final phase of construction. When it opens later this year, Tower F will soar 421 meters into the sky, 27 meters taller than Egypt's iconic tower and higher than any building in Western Europe. On paper, it's an extraordinary engineering achievement, but what makes this tower fully unprecedented isn't what's above the ground. It's what's buried 80 meters below it. Because Tower F isn't anchored into bedrock or even stable soil, it's been built on saturated sand, soft silt, and marine clay that compresses under extreme weight. Ground so unstable, engineers will refuse to build on it. So how do you anchor 170,000 tons of concrete and steel into ground that literally move beneath your feet? To understand Tower F, you have to understand the architect behind it. Because this isn't the first time Pierre Fakoly has attempted something the world say shouldn't be built. In the 1980s, Côte d'Ivoire's president gave him a commission few architects would ever received: design the greatest church on earth. The result was the Basilica of Our Lady of Peace in Yamoussoukro, a structure so vast it surpassed St. Peter's in Rome. Its dome rises 158 meters. The marble came from Italy. 7,000 squares of stained glass were shipped from France. It was completed in just 4 years at a cost estimated between $300 and $600 million. When Pope John Paul II consecrated the basilica in 1990, he did so on one condition: that a hospital be built nearby. That hospital wouldn't open until 2014. The basilica made Fakoly world famous and instantly controversial. Critics called it an extravagant monument to presidential ego, built while millions of Ivorians lack access to clean water. But Fakoly kept building. And now, at 81 years old, his most ambitious and riskiest project yet. A super tall tower rising from the most unstable ground on earth, set to permanently reshape Abidjan's skyline. Tower F was never supposed to take this long. In fact, it was never supposed to take 50 years. In the late 1970s, Côte d'Ivoire was riding what became known as the Ivorian Miracle. The economy was growing at up to 9% a year. By 1979, the country was the world's largest producer of cocoa and a major exporter of coffee, pineapples, and palm oil. Abidjan was booming. It earned the name the Manhattan of West Africa, a city of modernist towers, French-speaking professionals, and growing state power. To house that expansion, the government commissioned 5 administrative towers, labeled A through E, but there was always supposed to be a 6th, Tower F. The problem was the miracle didn't last, and in early 1980s, global cocoa prices collapsed, falling from nearly $3,000 a ton to barely $1,100 by early 90s. External debt tripled. In 1993, President Félix Houphouët-Boigny died. With him, Côte d'Ivoire's political stability collapsed. What followed was nearly 2 decades of turmoil: coup, disputed elections, civil war. At one point, the country was split into 2, rebels controlling the north, the government clinging to the south. And through all of it, Tower F never rose. For half a century, it remained a promise on paper, a tower waiting for a country stable enough to build it. By 2011, after more than a decade of instability, Côte d'Ivoire finally had a government in control. Alassane Ouattara consolidated power and the rebuilding began. Economic growth surged, exceeding 6% a year for more than a decade. Foreign investors returned, and the institutions that had fled during the conflict began coming back home. The African Development Bank, once forced to relocate to Tunis, announced plans to return its headquarters to Abidjan. But inside the government, a different problem was growing. Ministries were scattered across the city, spread over dozens of rented buildings. The state was paying hundreds of millions in rent every year. Basic coordination was slow, permits dragged on for months. By 2020, the equation had flipped. The cost of not building Tor F had become greater than the cost of building it. So, President Ouattara approved the project with a simple mandate: bring 140,000 square meters of government offices under one roof and end 50 years of delay. In July 2021, construction finally began. To build a tower this extreme, Côte d'Ivoire needed more than ambition, it needed experience, both local and global. At the center of the project is PFO Africa, the construction group founded by Pierre Fakouré. For more than 50 years, they built in Ivorian conditions, from the Basilica in Yamoussoukro to major water treatment plants across the country. They understand the climate, the materials, and the ground. But for a super tall of this scale, they needed a partner who had already gone higher than anyone else. So they turned to basics. The Belgian contractor holds a credential no other firm in Africa can claim. They helped build the Burj Khalifa. At 828 meters, it's been the tallest building on earth for more than 15 years. Basics know how to build upward, but there was a problem. Burj Khalifa rises from a compacted desert sand. Tor F rises from a narrow lagoon peninsula. Here, the challenge wasn't just to go higher, it was how to stop the entire structure from sinking. The greatest threat to Tor F wasn't wind, or earthquakes, or even height, it was ground itself. Abidjan's Plateau district sits on a narrow peninsula pushed out into Ebrier Lagoon, and beneath it lies some of the worst soil imaginable for a super tall tower. Silt, waterlogged sand, and marine clay that compresses under extreme weight. A ground like this, a conventional foundation wouldn't just crack, it would slowly sink. So, the engineers had to do something different. Instead of shallow footings, Basics deployed a system they refined on some of the world's most demanding projects, barrage foundations. These are enormous rectangular concrete elements, each measuring 3 meters by 1.5, excavated deep into the earth using slurry-supported trenches. 70 of them were installed. They plunged 60 to 80 meters below the surface, cutting through unstable soil until they finally reached competent rock. Above them, engineers poured a reinforced concrete shaft, 3.5 meters thick, locking the entire system together and spreading the tower's 170,000-ton weight across the site. But this is where Tower F's foundation becomes truly unusual. Because it isn't rigid. At this height, wind becomes a dominant force. The tower sways, and that movement sends enormous dynamic load downwards. So instead of resisting that motion, the foundation was designed to move with it. Tor F doesn't fight the ground beneath it. It flexes just enough to survive it. Once Tor F could stand, the race upward began. Because designing a super tall is one thing, actually building it is another. Getting concrete to the top of the tower like this one is one of the hardest challenges in high-rise construction. If it hardens too soon, the pour won't work. If the pressure goes down, the system stops working. To make this work, Basics partnered with German pumping specialist Schwingstetter, whose equipment has pushed concrete higher than almost anywhere on earth. At the heart of the operation was a single machine capable of forcing liquid concrete hundreds of meters into the air through steel pipes built to withstand extreme pressure. By July 2024, Tor F passed 200 meters. From there, gravity began to fight back. Speed was sacrificed for pressure. Slowly, relentlessly, floor by floor, the tower climbed. In June 2025, the final concrete pour was completed, but height introduces a new enemy, wind. At this scale, air no longer flows smoothly. It shed forces that push and pull the building rhythmically. Fight that motion and the structure cracks. Allow too much of it and the occupants will start feeling it. Tower F couldn't step back like the Burj Khalifa. Every floor had to remain the same size. So, the engineers reshaped the air instead. Chamfered corners and faceted faces break up the wind's current, preventing the formation of powerful vortices. Thousands of simulations tied to the facade, core and foundation into a single system, designed to move together. At its peak, the tower can sway by nearly a meter under extreme winds. That movement is invincible, controlled and essential. Then there is sun. Abidjan sits just north of equator, hot, humid, relentless. A conventional glass tower here would be an energy sink. So Tower F wears a second skin. 2 layers of glass create a ventilated buffer that deflects solar heat before it reaches the offices inside. Hot air rises and escapes. Cooling demands drop by up to 40%. Efficiency here isn't a bonus, it's survival. From a distance, the tower's faceted form echoes the geometry of traditional Western African marks, symbols of transition and transformation. As the light shifts, the building changes with it. Amber at dawn, white at noon, reflective at dusk. At the top, a 30-meter glass crown, the lantern, will become Africa's highest public observation decks. A tower delayed for 50 years, engineered against soil, wind and climate, and now standing as a signal for what comes next. In February 2024, something happened that nobody predicted. Côte d'Ivoire hosted the African Cup of Nations and the tournament started in disaster. A 4-0 humiliation against Equatorial Guinea. The head coach was fired mid-competition. Elimination seemed inevitable. Then the comeback began. Late equalizers, penalty shootouts, victories pulled from impossible position. The media gave them the name the Zombie Elephant, a team that simply refused to die. In the final, they faced Nigeria, trailing 1-0. Côte d'Ivoire equalized in 62nd minute. Then, with 9 minutes left, Sebastian Haller, striker who had returned just a year earlier after cancer treatment, scored the winner. Abidjan erupted. 27 million people celebrated a third continental title, and according to Schwingstetter, the victory triggered a decision. Tower F would not stop where planned. An additional steel structure will be added to the top, pushing the final height to 421 meters. Tall enough to be seen from National Stadium where the elephant had triumphed. The tower will carry the same message as the team: resilience, persistence, and refusal to accept defeat. Tower F doesn't stand alone. It's part of a broader race reshaping African skylines. In Egypt, the iconic tower sits at the center of $100 billion capital built from the scratch in the desert. In Morocco, the Mohammed VI Tower signals a pivot toward Gulf-style vertical development. And across the continent, from Cairo to Dar es Salaam, even taller projects sit on drawing board, including proposals that will reach 1,000 meters. These are not just buildings. They are instruments of state policy, vertical infrastructure designed to consolidate power, attract investment, and project national ambition. 20 years ago, African super towers were a fantasy. Today, they are a pattern, but history offers warning. Egypt's new capital has been criticized for pulling government away from the streets of Cairo. The basilica in Yamoussoukro still looms half empty, surrounded by poverty. Whether Tower F avoids the same fate won't be decided by its height, but by what comes next after the ribbon is cut. Tower F is scheduled for commissioning later in 2026. When completed, it will consolidate 140,000 square meters of government offices into a single address, ending decades of fragmentation and hundreds of millions in annual rent. For the engineers, it represents a technical victory. A super tower built on hostile ground in a tropical climate. For Pierre Fakoly, now in his 80s, it marks the culmination of a career that began with the world's largest church and ends with the continent's tallest tower. But for Côte d'Ivoire, its meaning runs deeper. After civil war, after coup, After 50 years of waiting, Tour F stands as a proof that some projects don't fail because they are impossible, they fail because the moment isn't ready. And sometimes, all it takes is time and the right ground to stand on. If you like definitive infrastructure project like this, please like and subscribe and let me know in the comment section what you think about this project and if you want me to share more of this kind of monumental projects happening across Africa. See you on the next one.